Thank you so much for joining me for another episode of Keeping It Real with America's Supermom. I am excited to have my next guest. I have Dr. Ray here, and we actually met on Clubhouse. I know I made so many connections on Clubhouse, but I'm so excited to have him here today. He really has me smitten with a lot of his value and insights just about life and business. So I'm excited to have a deep dive conversation about some of the topics that really keep me intrigued. But before we get into all that, I want to give Dr. Ray the floor so he can introduce himself.
America's Supermom, Lachelle, thank you. This is a great opportunity. For your listeners right now, they will notice I'm not from around these ways. So I came to the States nearly 6 years ago. I'm a professor living just outside of Indianapolis.
Awesome. And so, what brought you to the States? It's quite obvious with your accent that you're not from around these parts.
Yeah. Well, I was in LA speaking at a conference, business conference, and to cut a long story short, someone heard me speak. They came to London and we got speaking, and they invited me back to their university. And then the dean of the business school met me, and then eventually, over a couple of years, I took an opportunity when they offered me an opportunity to come over. So I went through the interview stage and found myself here.
Wow, that is awesome. And that's quite a leap of faith to come from an international, totally different international background. Or you tell me, when it comes to business, do you notice that it's different being abroad versus the United States in the things that you are encountering just within your industry now?
That's a great question. I think that we share a common language, but the cultural differences are subtle, but they're there. Whether
Mhm.
it be everyday issues connected to expectations when people speak to each other, where I think the common thread is I moved here to work for a very small Christian university. So I work what I would say in a Christian business school. So the
Mhm.
unifying aspect is that the principles, biblical principles that I espouse in my teaching are the priority. So I came not to come and teach just in the university sector. It was to work for a smaller one. And I do know that I guest speak at your alma mater down at IU in Bloomington.
Mhm.
So I've had the good fortune of teaching down there. I've done some work at Rose Holman, Butler, quite a few universities in the area, Purdue. So it's a privilege that I'm anchored to a Christian business school, but other business schools have asked me to speak.
That is awesome. And so what would you say is the hardest transition from living abroad to moving to the States?
Well, I came with my wife and 4 children. So when we arrived, I've got 2 boys and 2 girls in that order. So I came with
Mhm.
a 12-year-old boy, a 9-year-old boy, and then a 7 and a 5-year-old little girl. And my wife came over with me out of love and loyalty, but mostly lunacy because she wasn't sure about the move. So I truly am thankful for her trust and my kids' sense of adventure because we literally just packed our bags and flew across and moved straight into a rental. And it could have gone it could have gone wrong. But by God's grace, 6 years later, my kids now really are American kids who want dual citizenship between the UK and the US. So things are very different now. But it
Wow.
was an adventure. And I think you're right, Michelle. It was a step of faith. Not sure where we're going. And I suppose for me, from a biblical point of view, Hebrews 11, faith being sure of what I hope for, but certain of what I cannot see. That was where I was. I really had no clue. So I wouldn't encourage anyone to think about moving to another country or another environment unless you're anchoring it in a confidence that you're
Mhm.
willing to accept the challenges, because there will be challenges. You're stretched in different ways.
Mhm. I totally resonate with that, and I love that you mentioned the whole thing about faith and that scripture. Now, for many of the business owners that are watching,
Mhm.
What are some ways that they can make sure that they are anchored in the faith when it comes to taking such a move? And I mean, I know it's different for everybody, but we're in a pandemic right now, and a lot of people's industries are changing, and opportunities are coming different ways to where, they have to kind of stretch and get out of their comfort zone. But when you're dealing with faith, what are some ways that they can kind of be on the map to understand that they're on the right path when it comes to faith?
A great question. Here's my proposal to you, Michelle, is that I teach predominantly in areas of business strategy,
Hmm.
marketing, brand management. I'm helping businesses articulate a vision and a way forward. And when you think about branding, for example, it's largely understood. That was one of the cultural differences here. Branding is what is seen. It's
Hmm.
logos, it's people, it's businesses, it's the infrastructure. Well, the pandemic has shown us, both in the virus in of itself, um, that there are invisible qualities that are important to go again back to biblical things. And I don't want to preach, but it says largely that things that are seen are temporary, Corinthians, but things that are unseen are eternal.
Hmm.
What the pandemic has shown me in the business life, and if you see the companies that have successfully changed and pivoted, they're focusing on the intangibles, the emotion of their consumers, the heart-mind connection, their
Hmm.
purpose. So purposeful businesses seem to be surviving at the moment. If you're a business purely intent on transaction and just economic returns, they're struggling if a consumer base recognizes that. They want people that care. So I think my advice for businesses is no one cares about you until they know you care about them.
Very good.
So
Now, and you brought up some great points because I think that is so true because we are forgetting about the heart, the connection. So many people have loved ones that are affected
yeah,
with so many different things. They've experienced loss and didn't have a normal way of closure to say goodbye because of certain guidelines that had to be followed and things of that nature. So, what are some ways that someone can really hone in to kind of find out, what their core values and beliefs are? I mean, I think that with the way things are today, we kind of are at a crossroads with a lot of people to really kind of define where they're at so that they're clear about where they're going. So, with the way things are changing, whether you are a solopreneur or trying to do things on the side while working a regular 9 to 5, what are some things that you would suggest with them in terms of really determining what their core values are and setting a good foundation?
another great question. I would say that, and last week I spoke to the Chamber of Commerce in this Fishers area just outside of Indianapolis, and it's in Hamilton County. It's very affluent. The businesses generally um, are used to being successful. What's interesting is watching businesses face times they've never faced before. And one of the things I stressed last week, and I will for your audience today, is whether you're an individual, solopreneur, entrepreneur, small business, large corporate, you need to know your truth. Who are you really? And your truth is really an assessment of who you are and do you translate that authentically and do people receive it the way that you're intending? So I think everyone should know their truth. And for me, truth is a triangulation of three things. It's understanding who you are and the people you spend most of your time with. Because iron sharpens iron, again, a biblical principle. Whoever you're submersed with, your language will form that way, your behavior, your habits will be. Another thing is, what do you wake up every day as your priority? What is your priority? What pursuits and priorities fill your heart and mind? And we can see that in businesses, what their priority is. Um, and then the last one is principles. You don't have to be a Christian. That's my journey. I wish and hope I haven't offended anyone that doesn't have faith. I'm here to help anyone that feels that I've got a value that I can provide to them. So for me, it's what are your principles? Mine are guided by a biblical truth. And when I say biblical, it's a bit ambiguous. For me, and I'm going to be very explicit here, it's got a New Testament twist on it. I'm not someone driven by rules. I respect many of the governances of the history and evolution of the Bible, but I'm right where Jesus ended, saying you have to be fully committed to a higher self, God, and your relationship with God, but you must love others as yourself. And the key for businesses is when people know you care, when they really do, you have your community there. Bombas, I remember Bombas on Shark Tank, and most of the sharks weren't interested. And then at the last minute, Draymond said, I'm going to invest. And he said it's the best investment he ever made, because no one could understand a business model where the price of socks was higher than normal, but part of their purpose was to provide socks for the homeless. And that
Mm,
company is just appreciated and gone up. They provide underwear now, and that's their commitment. Everyone that invests in that knows the heart of that business, and it's been one
mm,
of the most successful investments. But if you think about investment, you invest in things that give you the most guarantee on a yield and a return. You don't invest on a company that has a clear purpose. But Bombas did, and look where they are today, a phenomenal company. So I think clear purpose. I think if you look at businesses that have a clear purpose and people get it, that truth, as I said, is the most important thing. Alignment of your truth with you, your employees, and those people that consume your products or services, and the rest of your stakeholders. The moment your purpose is confused, chaos ensues.
mm. That's some good stuff. Now, I love what you mentioned about the principles, because I think a lot of times when it comes to business, we look to people that are doing well in whatever industry that we are aspiring to be in. And we look at how they talk to people, how they dress and walk. And sometimes we can get lost in that and not even scratch the surface of the principles that they actually are living by. So, what are some ways that we can ensure that we do that, that we follow the principles, or even determine what those principles are outside of someone's personality? Because I think a lot of times we try to be just like somebody and we lose our authentic self instead of finding out the actual principle behind their success. Does that question make sense?
It does. And what I would say to you here, Lachelle, is that sometimes people get principles confused with the people and their daily habits,
Mm,
otherwise known as their culture. So
mhm,
if I prefix Christianity with cultural Christianity, I get
mhm,
concerned. When I prefix people with anything where you put culture in front, and what you're seeing is really, when I see someone's truth, oh, you're telling me your priority is you want to think and be around people exactly like yourself, and you already have a preordained way to deal with things. Those combinations have created a disaster for the pandemic, because the pandemic has revealed our truth like no other aspect. Because if America is the home of entrepreneurialism and free market, but that free market also has to operate, and it always has, with an underbelly of consideration for everyone in the market. And I think
mhm,
the last 2 years around the world, the UK is in chaos at the moment with supply chain issues. So gas stations, or we call them petrol stations in the UK, but gas stations are running out of fuel. So there are mile long lines to get gas because people are on the planet. And it came from one uh, leaked piece of information that there could be a supply chain problem. And at the moment, as we sit here on the cusp of the end of September, the UK is going through this challenge. Now, you may or may not know, it went through a process called Brexit, where it broke away from the European Union. And there are lots of issues there, and I'll put the politics aside. But what it's done is it's fundamentally changed the trajectory of business in the UK. So the government now are offering temporary visas to people they said they could no longer work in England, to help them with their supply chain, truck drivers, because there's a real big shortage. And it's creating attention. And my observation of that is, at the core of it, the principle that we want anyone who wants to roll their sleeves up and work hard, we welcome you. What they've done is, their principle is, You may want to work hard, but first we need to know whether you're French or you're British first. And that's caused attention. So they interviewed some of the European truck drivers who said, I'm not going to England to help them out because they've already been offended from the principles that we don't want you working in the UK at this moment. There's a good example for me that if the government's position is that from a principle point of view, that's fine. But what you've got to recognize is people, you broadcast that to the whole of the European community. So you can't then worry about that principle coming back and stinging you. Now, a challenge I'm going to put here, and you can get on my soapbox, is that I say to my students on an MBA program, Leviticus is a book in the Bible.
Mm-hmm.
It's full of rules and, what do you think? And most of my students will say to me, that's the place that's connected to issues to do with the LGBTQ community. And I say, okay, what else? That's one aspect. And they won't know anything else. But I actually say to them, and I don't know the platform and your heart, Michelle, we've known each other, we've connected principally on things, but it means we've had different journeys. So I'm having a conversation with you, and we could be going this way or together. But in Leviticus, it also says, love others as yourself. Love immigrants as yourself. Remember that what you once were an immigrant to a country. No one talks about that as a principle, a biblical principle. So I want us to go back to the relationship aspect. I met you in an area where you're leading on Clubhouse on relationship marketing. If you don't have a relationship as the vanguard cutting through the ice of life, you don't have anything. Because a transaction says to someone, I'm going to like you for this one moment because it suits me. But after that moment, we'll see. A relationship says, I'm committed to seeing you again. And that to me is the principle I think that we should all be trying to live by. Sorry, that's a long answer.
That was great. I think that is so true because I think so often we don't really go deep enough with our values and ideas and thoughts. And, we can have so many superficial answers, which really can be a basis for a lot of miscommunication because, so many things are subjective. My idea of success could be working for 4 hours a day and being able to relax. Whereas someone else, it's like, oh, I want to have this house, I want to have this vehicle, and it has to look this certain way. So I think that there is so much that we need to really have a conversation about and really explore as opposed to really thinking that everybody thinks the same way about everything, and just get into superficial conversation by believing that.
Well, one case which surprises some people, and I'm in the Midwest, so
Mm-hmm.
the home in the Midwest is everyone loves Chick-fil-A.
Mm-hmm.
So
My
my
kids just brought me some.
so
But this is water. This is a big cup.
okay.
It's nothing but water.
So
Okay.
here's the interesting thing. My kids, when they're allowed takeout, and we go, right, we're going to have a takeout day, because the cultural difference is my wife likes to cook home cooked food most times. So we'll have a takeout. But here, the cost of food is much cheaper takeout than it is in the UK. So immediately when we came here, going out and getting a takeout would be probably something you would think about once or twice a month in the UK. And when we came here, the people in our subdivision, that's once or twice a week people were going out. So suddenly it was an adjustment. There was a knock at the door the first night we stayed in our home. A neighbor brought a big box and it had jacks all over it. And I'm looking at this box. We close the door. My kids and my wife around me. We open the box. We have no clue what's inside. And then we see
Pizza.
12 beautiful donuts. Now, in the UK, people don't eat donuts for breakfast. So we all looked at each other and said, why have they brought us donuts?
Oh.
Now, with my kids, if they have a sleepover or friends stay, guess where I'm going? I'm going to the donut place. I'm bringing them back.
Right.
Because all of a sudden now, we're aligning that actually what the neighbor was doing, they're great neighbors, they were showing love and hospitality to us. This was excellent, but we didn't fully understand it at the time because their proposition of value was different from what we would think. Now, we've never had gravy is something you have with a dinner.
Mm-hmm.
It's not something you have with breakfast. So when I heard the term gravy to start off with, it's like, I don't get that. Because I have lineage from the Caribbean,
Right.
Cornbread or something else, I get.
Yeah.
It's the common things, but gravy. Now we have something called beans on toast for breakfast. People have in the UK, and when
Wow.
I share that with Americans, they say, "No, no, time out. That's not right."
What
So,
kind of beans?
so they're an American company, Michelle. Would you believe? But they exclusively make these in the UK called Heinz baked beans. If any of your listeners go down an international aisle, they will find Heinz baked beans,
Yeah.
and they taste different from the typical aisle and line when you go down and buy what might be typically bought here as beans. But the UK have those. If anyone's travelled to the UK, they will see the English breakfast. They will see an option to have beans, and it's those beans. So,
Wow.
so those differences. But the last thing I would share with you, which some people will go, "Wow," particularly from a biblical point of view. I said to people, "How long did it take the Lord to make, the world?" And they said, "Well, 6 days and a day of rest." And I would expect any Christian university in grad school to know that. So I give them a tick. Okay, wonderful. And then I say, well, Chick-fil-A is a great product. I started with that. They went to the UK, I think it was August, September 2019, just before the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
I'll ask you, Michelle, how successful do you think they'd be?
Uh, Chick-fil-A in the UK?
Chick-fil-A in England, yeah.
I would say if they change their menu, they might be successful.
Okay. They lasted about 7 days.
Really?
Yeah.
What was it? Did they not
So
incorporate the culture or something?
yeah,
Or
remember at the beginning of this conversation, I was talking about the tangible element of business and the
mhm,
intangible. The tangible element of Chick-fil-A is they are excellent at what they do.
mhm.
So the UK has KFC for decades. So you would have thought, well, Chick-fil-A coming in, it's going to happen. And the
Right.
UK has a restaurant chain of chicken food providers called Nando's. So if you go to London, you mention Nando's, particularly to the black community, oh, Nando's. Everyone eats at Nando's.
Okay.
So no one is against chicken, but this was this is a city that's just outside of London, its own city called Reading.
Mhm.
And what happened was public relations reached the media outlets in the UK, and they
Mhm.
took a thread from one of the founders and their comment about the LGBTQ community. Well, when they made their comment, that term didn't exist, but it referred. Now, what happened is the culture of the UK and the media is if they think a business doesn't like a particular group of people, what happened? They had demonstrations outside, and the demonstrations got so big that the landlord said to Chick-fil-A, "I think we should end the arrangement."
Wow.
Now, when I tell Americans, wow, how, and for me, it's the relationship between alignment. Chick-fil-A is a great product, but they
Mhm.
were judged by one person's comment, which is not, I know people who work at Chick-fil-A. It doesn't reflect the heart of Chick-fil-A. Um,
Right.
but remember, it's not what you experience here within this territory. If you're going to another territory, you have to do the homework. And from the information I did, they didn't do any international kind of market research to understand how do we translate our values, and most importantly, the intangible values. Um, because even here, I've understood that in New York and the West Coast, there's going to be less Chick-fil-A's. And
Right.
there was a little bit of resistance in Canada, I believe, in Toronto, but nothing to the extent where it stopped them making business happen.
Yeah.
Did in the UK.
Wow. That's interesting. But
Yes,
that is definitely another testament to, like you said, doing your homework and the value of relationships.
yes, yeah,
You know, and I think a lot of people kind of struggle with that because, they think that money is always the end all be all, and
yeah,
they determine value based on, someone's influence. We see this a lot when it comes to social media, but there are a lot of people that really prefer principles over profit, and they will take a stand, and definitely that can be a make or break for a lot of businesses and relationships.
So one of the mantras I share with students here is that I believe in this age, purpose before profit
Mhm.
is key. The great resignation in America at the moment is related to the intangibles. People working from home for a while, and Gen X, Gen Zs and millennials are different. I'm a Gen Xer. So
Mhm.
if you grew up and you're a child in the 70s and 80s, then you say to yourself, okay, you know where things are. There was a certain type of experience. But if you're a Gen Z and you started work from home, the research suggests that they don't like their pay, their conditions, their benefits, their relationships. But the key meaning that's coming out of the research is they've discovered new value with flexible working conditions. This has been such a disruption to North America and parts of Europe because your workforce is your pipeline for future generation profit. And that very workforce now is motivated by different things.
Mhm.
That's just a paradigm shift that I think companies have got to, trying to adjust to.
Mhm.
Many of the technology companies said work at home forever and a day. Many of them are changing that now because they recognize that we're gregarious. We need to connect at some level, but it's chaos. But when you talk about nearly 11 million people deciding, I'm not sure if I like the way to work, that's like complete difference to me. As a Gen Xer, I was brought up with the principle, you better get up and
Exactly.
you better get up and do the work you need to do. Now,
Exactly.
the younger generation is, well, do I like that job?
It is so true. I mean, I have some young, children and, where they're, young adults,
Yeah.
and, they just get to a point, "Oh, you know what? I just quit." I wasn't gonna put up with it. I'm like, "Okay, did you put a 2-week notice?" "No, I'll get something else." I
Yeah.
mean, they're just so matter of fact about it. It's like, "What?" But
But
yeah, so I totally get that.
I know we're short on time, but someone shared something with me that I really like. Baby boomers came out and grew through the post-war explosion in demand, the swing
Mhm,
is and everything else, and then the Gen Xers. Me, I fly the flag for that. We were born, but we were latchkey kids, and what I
mhm,
discovered was I was a latchkey kid in England, but people were in America because
mhm,
both parents had to go out. If you were blessed with two parents, but
mhm,
whatever your personal circumstances, your family had to go out and grind and work hard.
mhm,
So
mhm.
you had to make do. Well, what that's done is they argue is it's created a generation of Gen Xers that are now helicopter parents, and they've overprotected and coddled the next generation. Then you add in 9/11, you add in the financial collapse of 2008, you add in the pandemic. We have a very much more sensitive group of people that are very much more aligned to their experiences. So I'm interested to see what type of parent we're going to have after the helicopter parent, or some people call them the lawnmower parent. That it's not just about watching them. Now you need to cut them down and get the grass blades to lean the way you want.
Mhm.
And we're doing that in an attempt to give them a better sense of life by scheduling their life. The problem is by scheduling someone's life so much, they've not been able to flex their own muscle.
Yeah.
And the pandemic is not a time to take lightly because it's a major increase at the same time, particularly among young people, of mental health issues. And mental health issues, again, is an intangible that I think, and I'm very passionate about, should be lifted up. Let's stop just look at things and take things on superficial value.
That's true.
It's really important. I'll end on this comedic element, again, not wishing to offend anyone, but
Mhm.
when I came here, my wife and I, we'd walk into a store and we recognized that people treated us differently based on what they saw and then when we spoke.
Right.
So I'm treated as a black man, but then when I speak, my African American friends will say, you're not around from here. In fact, you sound white. And I'm like, I'm sorry, this is who I am. This is the only person I know. I can give you a pretend American accent, but it's not going to roll. It's not going to be fine and work the way it is. This is me. But equally, I found in the Midwest as well, complex, Michelle, complex, and you might relate to this, but a lot of white people, their form of engagement is in my intangible. When they hear my accent, they're asking me about the Queen. They're asking me about Downton Abbey on TV or The Crown. People find a point to relate with another person of where they find the access. My hope and prayer is that we don't judge people by just what we see. We work out that inside the scene is a real person with a real heart, a real character, And if we could just slow down, life would be much better, because the intangible, what we don't see, is the key to understanding another.
So true. I mean, that was beautifully said, and I definitely agree with that. And I'm sure, when it comes to business, it opens a lot of doors for you having that accent. I
It
don't know
does,
why, but it's
it
it's
does for
so
sure. But here's the thing I also share, and I shared this last week in the business. I have privilege because of accent. I can give
right.
you a line of privilege, perhaps even being employed in America the first time. Speaking to a business community last week, doing some of the things I've been able to do, go to these universities. Has it been because here is a man that's got these ideas? Or has it been, is there something in my personal brain? He's a black man with an English accent, with a doctorate in this area. This sounds good. We'll call him in.
Mhm.
So and here's the thing, what I love when I talk about DE&I to people is when I say I've got the privilege, people get confused here when I say that.
Well, those that know, you know what I mean? When you're dealing with business, you know how to leverage things. You know
Yeah,
your assets. You know what I'm saying? So
yeah.
I get that. So, uh, but thank you so much for your time.
It's
This has
been a
been
privilege.
wonderful. I mean, I could go for hours and definitely would love
Thank
to have
you.
you come back again and talk to us about some more insights. But just have really enjoyed everything that you've shared. For those of you that are watching, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to Dr. Ray. What is the best way for them to get a hold of you?
If they want to do an individual approach, they can find me on LinkedIn.
Hmm.
But I'm a professor, full professor at Anderson University in Indiana. So if they go online and put Anderson University in, they will find this ugly face on the website, and they can send me an email that way.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much for joining us today. We know that you could have been anywhere. If you found value with this video interview, feel free to share it with other people. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to put them in the comments, because that's how we can change and improve and be better versions of ourselves from just simple conversations.
And Michelle, can I ask you to say hello to the British people that will now watch this?
Absolutely. Hello to all the Brits who are watching. I would love to have any of your friends, colleagues to come back on and join us. I love hearing the English accent. I just can't get enough of it. So I think it's wonderful. So
Thank you.
I'm so glad that we got acquainted and we're able to have a conversation.
Absolutely. Thank you for the privilege. It's been an honor.
You are so welcome. And we want to thank all of you guys for watching and joining us today. And we look forward to seeing you all on the next episode. Bye for now.
Bye.